Right. Hello, Lucy. Welcome to this month's interview for our Adventurous Inc. Now, this is really weird because there's just the two of us. And normally there's about another 98 people joining us on the Zoom call. There's a good reason for that. So Lucy is the author of this fabulous book, March's book, Losing Eden. Why Our Minds Need the Wild, which we will be talking about this afternoon, not evening. I nearly fell into saying evening because that's when we normally do this. But Lucy is expecting a little one in a couple of days, on Saturday even.
Yeah.
So we're very lucky that she's joined us. Thank you very much, Lucy. I really, really appreciate it. And let's just hope we don't get diverted by the arrival of a little one halfway through. Fingers crossed. So let's start with your background then, Lucy. So tell me about your early experiences of the outdoors. You express such a love of it in the book. That must come from somewhere. So where does it come from? What were you doing when you were little? Little Lucy, tell us about it.
Well, I grew up in a school. My dad's a teacher in Berkshire, and it was quite it had some really nice grounds, and we had a garden, and I was quite a collector, so I used to collect aphids and spiders and woodlice and stuff in little plastic pots. Was always very into insects, but I think my kind of like real falling in love with the trees and the rest of nature happened in Scotland, where my grandparents lived. So they lived in kind of remote Galloway, which is very wild, just on the sea, incredibly beautiful, kind of the light changing from hour to hour. And they had a woodland near the house, which we could just go and roam in alone. And I think that's where I kind of made myself in a way, and found my imagination could kind of take flight, and felt kind of at home, and I just loved it as a young age. I loved climbing trees and sitting in the tree house and exploring and investigating and all the senses. But then I guess, like a lot of people, when I became a older child or early teenager, all that stuff went dormant for quite a long time, and I moved into a much more kind of urban lifestyle. But for certainly, I was so fortunate that the seed had already been planted, and I'd had these opportunities. And my dad used to take us on really long walks, particularly in France, when we'd have holidays. And at the time, I probably groused and complained, and
You sound just like my kids. They're constantly complaining that I'm taking them up hills.
Well, I bet they'll be glad though, and I mean, I certainly feel, looking back on it, so glad that we were made to go on these long walks where just having an experience of smelling pine trees, or hearing bird song, and then that coming back to you later in life. And the kind of the palette of the senses that you get in the outdoors was very formative for me.
So I think it's good to invoke those senses. So obviously you've got that smell of the pine trees. What are the sounds that you remember from when you were little?
It's a really good question. I think that in my head, I'm thinking about kind of bird of prey calls, because we would spend quite a lot of time in the south of France. My dad's a real birder. Maybe it's because I've been listening to a kite today and it's kind of going around in my head. I feel like the kind of sounds of birds of prey hunting, the sound of the sea, because we would be by the sea quite a lot. I suppose the waves in Galloway could be really, really wild. And the beach in Galloway is kind of shingle and quite big shells, so you get that lovely sound of when the waves crash against it, and it's really percussive. those are the ones that stand
Oh,
out.
that's fab. That's fab.
Great question.
And it's funny, you know, I'm because of all the uncertainty around where we're going this summer, what's going to be happening this summer, which we'll probably come back to later on. I'm planning a family holiday to Galloway. So there we
Oh,
go.
cool. Where do you know where you're going to go?
Not yet. No. Where were your grandparents? Whereabouts were they?
They're near a place called Rockcliffe, which is kind of on the Solway Firth, near Kipford, near Dalbeattie. But you can't go wrong in Galloway. It's stunning.
And kind of accessible but remote, and all those good bits.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is it midgy? Do you remember midges from when you were?
Yeah, sometimes, like, it wouldn't happen all the time, and I think it's probably gets more midgy the further north you go. But certainly there would be some days where you kind of wouldn't want to go outside for long, but not to the point where you should not go because of that in August. You'll be fine.
Just won't tell my wife. Let's make it a deal. Won't tell my wife. We'll be fine with that. But I love that thing about it's so often the case, isn't it, that it's our parents, but also our grandparents who give us that route into nature. And you know, I think our generation was so fortunate to have that, and I know lots of us are trying to kind of find that for our next generation. But there's a lovely phrase that you used in there. Well, it's not lovely. It's quite a depressing phrase about successive generations losing that connection. What was the phrase, and where did it come from?
Yeah, that's the extinction of experience, which is a phrase from Robert Pyle, the American writer, and it means, I mean, exactly what you said, really, the kind of winnowing and tapering of, you know, as our contact with nature diminishes and as species and habitats are destroyed. So it would follow that our kind of experience and our relationships with other living beings and landscape and so on it is necessarily going to kind of narrow. So for example, like my grandmother, who's 94 now, she knows kind of all the names of all the butterflies and the wildflowers. My parents definitely know kind of much like timings and patterns of the natural world. My mum's a painter, so of the natural world, really, so she's quite tuned in. And until I kind of had this reconnection or reawakening with the rest of nature, I probably knew maybe 5% of what they knew. And Robert Pyle kind of, you know, says that this is a kind of symptom of the way we live now, that we have this extinction of experience. And he has this quote, you know, what does the extinction of a condor mean to a child who's never known a wren, or something along that lines? You know, how can we love or care for or protect the things that we don't even know? So I suppose the book is kind of a way of trying to fight against that idea of those experiencing it.
And I think it does a fabulous job of it. I found it both inspiring and scary, to be frank. But I guess that's a feeling that I have a lot. But yeah, that extinction of experience, it captures it so well, and it's not a phrase that I'd come across before. I'd heard it referred to as shifting baselines, and that you can't know what has gone before. Yeah, so it's a telling phrase about the way that we live today. But I think you're doing a great job of trying to fight against that, and hopefully lots of people who've read it will pick up that and use that as inspiration. Maybe come back to that in a bit. So that was when you were growing. Where do you live now? Because you mentioned in the book going for a swim in the river. Is that near you? Is that a regular place? Are you still able to keep doing that?
Yeah, so I was in London for a long time, and then about 4.5 years ago, we moved out to Basingstoke in Hampshire, when my daughter was 2 weeks old. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. House with a 2-week-old. So yeah, we live in a town in kind of the English countryside, and we're kind of 10 minutes away from rivers, which I only realized in the last year that I'm not actually allowed to swim in, but that's another story because of the way our land is owned. But still, we go back, and yeah, I found kind of wild swimming in rivers probably the highlight of moving out of London, actually, being able to swim regularly in the rivers and take my children to look for minnows and smell the water mint. And it was quite personally important as well. Losing Eden kind of came out of, personal experience of recovering from some health issues. And what I didn't kind of expect was, as I was writing the book, I experienced a postnatal depression period too, and it was quite interesting to kind of be writing about kind of recovery through nature and then it kind of all happening again. But swimming in the rivers in Hampshire was probably the equivalent experience to walking in Walthamstow Marshes, which is where the book Losing Eden kind of starts, and I found just incredibly therapeutic, and I can't wait to go back into the rivers at some point once my baby's out and it's maybe a bit warmer.
Fab. It's, and you can feel that lived experience in the book. It really comes through very strongly. I think it makes it an incredibly powerful book. So why did you write it? What was the thing that you went, actually, I need to write about this. I need to write this book. What was the trigger?
So I think it was the sheer power of being pretty unwell with depression, anxiety, and addiction issues, really feeling that I was on my knees, and starting to get better with psychiatry and psychotherapy and support groups, but then stumbling upon these daily walks I was having, which started out as runs, really, because I knew the science behind, running and endorphins. But what they turned into were more, contemplative walks when I was just stand and watch a kestrel, or just spend some time next to a pond and like looking at the coots and the moorhens. And the power of that on my mind and my spirit at that time, which felt very jagged and I kind of felt like I was walking around without skin, trying to kind of adapt to a new kind of sober life, just really took me by surprise. I would feel soothed and calmed, and kind of my brain would feel quieter, the inner critic stuff and all that, those negative thoughts would be silenced by spending time with nature. And I mean, to a lot of people listening, and maybe to you as well, that probably just seems really obvious, and that we have intuitively known that being in nature can affect our minds, and has been kind of used or seen as a kind of treatment for ill health. But the fact that I found it so surprising was interesting to me as well. The fact that I'd become so kind of disconnected from the earth and disconnected from the rest of the living world, that I was like amazed that being in it was making me feel better, felt in some way an important thing. And I could kind of understand and explain, it's nice going for a walk, it's nice being in the woods, there's something, it makes me feel good, but it didn't feel like enough of an answer. It changed my life so acutely that I really wanted to get under the hood and look at the mechanism and just ask how and why, when we're in these natural spaces, when we're with other living beings, what's actually happening to us, to our brains and bodies and minds and souls. What are the the processes by which that seems to have an uplifting of the spirit. And I just found that question kind of could scattergun into so many different other questions and disciplines. And as I started to investigate and inquire, I realized that neuroscience had some really interesting things to say about it. But then so did, like the psychoanalytic writings of Jung. And then, thinking about kind of existentialism and death, or Druidry, or, our hormonal systems, or it just seemed like a really interesting subject to look at through a variety of prisms. But I suppose, it started from a personal, just wanting to, I've always been one of those annoying, that's why I'm a journalist, why is this happening? What's happening? I just wanted to know, and figure it out. Because I guess I thought, if this is so powerful, and of course, I could see anecdotally and through other books about kind of the healing power of nature, that I wasn't alone in this. Why weren't we doing more to protect the natural world? Because my experience had shown me how essential it was for my sanity. So that was what I wanted to do, why I wanted to write it.
And it's I think you obviously had that right mix of that personal lived experience, but you had the mix of skills as well from the journalism side. But also, there was a reference in the book to you having trained as a psychoanalyst for a bit. So it seemed like it was a perfect coming together of lots of different parts of you. It feels a very you book.
Thank you. So I did the first year I did a kind of foundation certificate in counselling and psychotherapy. So I was thinking, I think this probably happens to a number of people, when I had a very life-changing experience of psychotherapy, and then you want to kind of see if you can do it yourself. I found I couldn't really. Actually, it's a skill that I don't think I have, although it's kind of similar in a way to journalism, because you're just wanting to ask questions, or not ask questions, but understand people. So yeah, I guess it was a kind of lucky confluence of events, with the kind of psychological interests I had, and the personal experience of kind of going through some stuff, and then combined with kind of the science journalism, and I guess also, the book is I think probably underpinned essentially by the science, but then it, in the latter kind of half of it, it does get a bit more esoteric, maybe a bit more spiritual.
I love the Druid. I'm where do I sign up? Where do I sign up to be a Druid? That's it. That's my thing now. I want 8 solstices and equinoxes. Brilliant. What a fab thing to do. I always remember, slight diversion, I always remember climbing once in a place called Armscliff near here, and pulled over. It's a rock that's kind of a bit of an outlier above Wharfdale Valley, and you can see it from miles around. And I pulled over the top, and I was amazed to see this Druid with a massive wolfhound there celebrating one of the solstices. And this is before I knew much about these things. But it always stuck with me, this image of someone there who had a completely different connection and relationship with the natural world to the one that I did, scrambling up the side of a rock face with ropes attaching me to it.
Wow. And the wolfhound, that's a great dog for a Druid to have. I can picture it now. There's been a kind of renaissance of Druidry in the last year. It's interesting. I think people are looking for ways of trying to find that connection, to deepen their connection with the natural world, in ways that certainly I have felt that I don't really have kind of rituals or rites or songs, or ways of wanting to deepen the relationship. And I think Druidry is interesting. There's a lot going on there.
And that's, you use a really interesting set of phrases there about rituals and rites and songs, and this is what we've done for millennia, isn't it? This is how we've understood the world, how we've understood each other, and we've lost that. And I think we're now getting to the point where we're starting to go, what's missing? Why do we have this wave of mental health concerns? What is happening to us? And how do we piece this back together? And it's not just about going for walks in the woods or going wild swimming. That we do need those other sacraments, I guess you could call it, other rites and rituals, ways of bringing this together, and doing it in a way that you can't forget about it. You know, there's the solstice happens when the solstice happens, and you celebrate it, and that's just the thing. Yeah, I think it's
yeah, absolutely. And sacraments is a really good word for it, and I think that kind of speaks to I don't know, I definitely feel like I've, like, since kind of reconnecting with nature and getting so much from it, and kind of pitching up to the woods and the marshes and the sea and so on, and, you know, expecting my spirit to be fed, which often it is, and kind of quite aware that I do have this kind of slight take extractive mindset with nature, but in the last few years really wanting to kind of think about how to have a reciprocal relationship, and I think sacrament kind of ties into that a bit, because I don't know, feels like it feels like the way, I don't know, I've definitely, in my culture, in my society, the way I've been brought up, it is about what you can take, but, you know, in having a reciprocal relationship could be really good for both sides, I think. I don't really know what it looks like yet. I'm trying to figure it out at the moment.
I think we're all trying to figure it out. So I think a lot of my community will know my backstory, which is heavily into nature as a sort of teenager. Went away to university, discovered clubs, techno music, and that was it. I was gone. I used to run audio visual events. I did a lot of that and everything that goes with it. And I was out for a run this weekend, actually, and I was thinking about your book and thinking about our interview. And as I'm running through a place called Scotland Wood, actually, which always seems to come up in these interviews, I'm really sorry that I keep going on about Meanwood Valley, but it's my place, it's my escape. And that Faithless song came into my head, and I was thinking, you know, this is my church. This is where I heal my hurt. Not that I've got a particular hurt to heal at the moment, although I have. That's another part of my story that we share. And having read your book, the thing that it really lit a light in my head was when you talked about awe and how we experience awe when we're in nature. And I think that's possibly one of the things that we feel that we're missing from our lives, and that we're looking to recreate in the same way that people have recreated it from religion, people have recreated it from music, people have recreated it from art, culture, drugs, addiction, all of those things. I think it's searching for awe, isn't it? It's looking for that wow moment, and that was something that was new to me from your book, in the way that it described it. Is that what one of the things that you took from it, the importance of that awe relationship?
Yeah, that's so beautifully put, and I really relate to what you're saying about, you know, the techno and the clubbing. That was my life too, and I think, you know, you can get awe experiences through those things, can't you? And there's different ways of experiencing awe, and it's such an ancient emotion that has evolved kind of with us, in us. And what really struck me and startled me when I looked into the science of awe, which is a relatively new field, kind of 10, 20 years, headed up by this guy, Dasha Keltner in California, was, well, a few things. Firstly, that when we experience awe, it has a physiological effect on our bodies. So I guess we all would say that feeling awe is a nice feeling, you know, it's something that we enjoy, it's a positive emotion. But actually, studies show, you know, that experiences of awe are associated with lower levels of an inflammation biomarker. So it actually kind of has these measurable effects on our body that are good for our health. And the other thing which kind of ties into your mentioning addiction is, when people experience awe, studies of their brain show that it quietens the default mode network, which is the area of the brain associated with sense of self, rumination, brooding. It's where there's activity if someone is depressed. it's something that is also connected with kind of addict brains of kind of the sense of self, the kind of the thought patterns, and so on, negative ruminations and brooding that I certainly I was familiar with before. And awe can actually kind of take us out of ourselves, and of course that's what it does, isn't it? It takes us out of ourselves and makes us faces us with the sublime or wonder. And I think that you can actually experience awe even in the tiny things. So I get a lot of awe out of moss and lichen. I'm really into sporophytes at the moment, which are the tiny little kind of like, they're like sticks that come out of the moss, and then they look like they have a little hat or like a lantern, little miniature things. I think you can get a lot of awe out of that, and you can just get that kind of in an urban area. The last thing that I found fascinating about the science of awe was the impact on how we see each other. So it can make us kinder and more generous. In studies, people were more likely to, for example, share prize winning cash winnings of a prize if they'd seen an image of something awesome. So it could make us more pro-social and nicer to each other. So I feel like, yeah, we could all do with more awe in our lives.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So in the conversation so far, we've talked about so many disparate elements, and I think one of the things I love about the book is the way that you weave all of these different bits back together, and it makes sense. How do you do that? How do you bring all these different bits together and then go, but this is what it means? What's the process for doing that?
Thank you. I'm glad it makes sense. Do you mean in terms of the actual kind of writing and editing process, or more? Yeah, was that what you mean?
Yeah, no, I do mean in terms of the writing, because it must be a tricky task to go from looking at scientific studies of awe to chatting to a druid to your own personal experience. But I think the book does a brilliant job of bringing it all together and making sense of the reader. It's not a task that I could manage, and I know lots of other people would recognize the connections between all those different bits. But how did you sit down and go, well, I'm going to do a bit of that and a bit of that and a bit of that, and then I'm going to piece it all together, and it's all going to have a narrative flow and that works in a book?
Yeah, I guess it was quite a long process, and I had two really brilliant editors as well. I think I got quite good at, I think I probably did too much research, which I tend to do. But what happened was it was a really fortunate timing that as I was trying to figure out this question, how and why does nature affect our minds? I didn't realize until I kind of stumbled into it that actually there's this huge scientific field of nature and mental health, which kind of encompasses so many different disciplines, and scientists across the world are trying to measure and prove and explore the same question. So I was really lucky that there was not a dearth of material. And then I just kind of followed my nose a bit. I was quite conscious that that I love science writing, but I also really like personal writing. And I wanted to make sure I could kind of leaven the studies, and kind of the heaviness of the material, which, let's be honest, we're not living in a great time, in terms of the way we're treating the earth and our dysfunctional relationship with it. So I wanted to make sure I could, I really wanted to try and transmit to the reader a sense of awe and wonder and love of nature and kind of beauty and color and the senses and all those things that I loved, like on the page, in order to bring the science to light. So I suppose that was a kind of guiding principle through the book. Yeah, I mean the narrative flow. I was quite inspired by Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I think I remember trying to write the same amount of chapters as her, and then the dystopian sci-fi prologue is kind of a direct reference to her. She does a similar thing, because I felt like with Silent Spring, Carson was warning everyone about DDT and pesticides and kind of sounding the alarm. And similarly, I felt that I was trying to sound some kind of alarm, about what we're missing out on if we don't have a kind of relationship with the rest of nature. And I mean, I suppose the narrative flow is also a journey, really, as well, of of kind of, I go to Poland and I go to Svalbard, and kind of questions come up, and in a way it's also built around I think one of my final versions was this might be getting too dorky for you, but structured around the 7 ages
Honestly,
of
you
man.
can't go too dorky for me. It's absolutely fine. Go on, keep going. It's structured around
The seven, what is it called? The 7 ages of man. I think it's a Shakespearean thing. It starts with like child, soldier, and goes. I can't remember the exact names, but it goes through a life course. So I vaguely structured it around that, the kind of a life course. You're starting with like my baby in the soil, eating soil and what that means, and then ending with thinking about existentialism and death.
Well, it clearly works, and that's fascinating that you based a lot of it around Silent Spring, because I definitely got a strong sense of that without knowing that was there. So that was obviously a key element in there. I mean, there's some beautiful writing in there. I love the analogy of our relationship with nature being like a mother and her truculent teenage daughter. Was there a bit of you in there? Is that maybe where that came from?
Sounds like you should be a therapist. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't know if my mum will ever watch this, but yeah, that came quite late to me, actually, and I think it was inspired by probably having children of my own, and then that changing my own relationship with my own mother, and thinking about how that central relationship that we all have is complicated and complex, and changes as well, kind of through, especially with mothers and daughters, I think. But yeah, so that felt like it just felt like an analogy that might work to describe the way we treat the earth at the moment, the kind of in our society, in our culture, the kind of obsessive individualism, which is similar to, in a way that a teenager has to individuate and separate, and kind of through that can kind of trash and hate a parent, and it felt to me that maybe we were in that kind of adolescent stage with the earth, and yeah, that was just this, the state that we were in, and maybe we would move out of it.
Well, let's hope so. And I think that's the thing about life stages, is that you move from one to another, and I think it can be quite difficult for us to see that life is about change, isn't it? Everything changes. There's a flow and a cycle to everything, but when you're in the moment, it doesn't always feel like that. And I think, yeah, there's a hopeful message in there. But I thought the analogy worked fabulously. I love the phrase about neighborhoods being fields where we grow people as well. Was that yours, or was that one you took from?
That was one from Professor Richard Mitchell, who's at the University of Glasgow. So he developed this really, really interesting, beautiful, important concept of equigenesis. The name, I don't know if it does it justice. It's quite a kind of it doesn't tell you what it means. So it means,
Sciencey, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it means that there are some kind of aspects of life, green space being one, or access to quality green space, which seem to reduce and narrow health inequalities between the rich and the poor. So Rich Mitchell and Frank Popham published a study in the Lancet in about 2008, which they looked at a surprisingly resilient population in the Northeast.
Where was that? I was going to ask, do you know where it was in the Northeast?
I can't remember exactly where it was off the top of my head. Maybe it was in Newcastle. I can't remember. And they found that the access to green space seemed to be the factor that meant that even though they were disadvantaged and kind of living in poverty, that actually their health inequalities weren't as bad as they might be because of this access to nature. So they concluded that access to nature could narrow the rich and poor health gap, which is a pretty big deal.
And it was that section that really, because I'm a right-thinking, progressive, nice middle-class person who understands that diversity and inclusivity are important things, but actually it told me why they're important, and that was really powerful for me, because I think in the past I'd probably just thought it's just the right thing to do, whereas that told me why it was the right thing to do, which I thought was wonderful. And again, I read a lot about this stuff, and it's great that there's still new things that you can discover, and people can still introduce you to new concepts and give you new perspectives, and you go, okay, right, that I get that now. I understand that. So, thank you for that. I thought it was.
That's really good to hear. I'm so glad. I mean, in a way, with that section, I'm just amplifying the work of health geographers and scientists and public health researchers who, like as you say, are proving how important it is for all people to have access to kind of high quality natural spaces, because without it, they don't have the same equal opportunities for kind of stress relief and restoration and so on. So yeah, I mean, I was lucky that there are so many amazing scientists happy to talk to me and explain, and I could just kind of put it all together really and amplify it and
simplify it. I think that's the other thing that the book does wonderfully well. I mean, it's exemplified with what you were just saying about equigenesis, and that being a term that doesn't really mean much. You said the same about lots of our natural designations and acronyms, and you took issue with SSSRIs, and hey, that I don't even know how I managed to say it. I'm not even sure if I said it correctly. What do you think science of special scientific interest should be properly called? What would be a better name for a site of special scientific interest?
I don't know, like Wonderlands or parks or something like that.
There you go. Once you come
back, we'll work on it.
Once you come back from maternity leave, I'll hook you up with some of my old contacts in DEFRA, because they could do with that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I definitely think words are important, and we often do concepts a disservice by the words that we use to describe them.
Yeah, there's definitely like a paucity, I think, of language around our environment, and even the word nature, it's problematic, isn't it? I mean, it kind of underlines the separation that we feel, that we are in here and nature is out there, and it's a fallacy, it's an illusion, but we just don't have enough words. We need more words, we need more language. There's a guy called...
What's your favorite word
in the whole world?
No, in relation to the natural world, what's your favorite word?
I do like wonder.
Sorry, with an O or with an A? Wonder or one? Or
with an O. I don't know. I guess, yeah. I think that there's something for me anyway, uniquely. I feel like I get a lot of wonder from from being in nature and being outdoors. What about you?
Petrichor.
Oh yeah, well there you go. Then that's the right answer. That's the best word. I love that word too. Which is very good for you, as well, as you might have read in my book that it activates the brain areas associated with well-being.
That was a complete revelation. I thought it was fab. But yeah, I've always, as soon as I heard there was a word for the smell of rain, and my kids, I think it's one of those dad tricks that you can pull when you go, I think it's going to rain, kids, and they're like, how do you know that, Daddy? And I can just smell it in the air, and I guess it's back to that thing about the what was it, the extinction of experience, and maybe, you know, maybe our children don't experience the fact that you can smell rain before it hits you, or you can see it coming.
Yeah.
So they're always so either, you know, sheltered or hemmed in by buildings. Interesting. Anyway, enough about me. What was I going to say? So when did you write this? When was it written?
Well, I started as soon as I had this kind of like moment. I went into recovery and started wandering on the marshes, and suddenly was like something really major's going on in my mind when I'm in these spaces. I kind of started to research it, and I was working at NME at the time as a music journalist, and I was also doing this therapist course, and I was starting to work more as a science journalist, mostly for the BBC. So I kind of was starting to kind of casually research, and what I tended to do, I guess I was quite fixated on it. I'd interview kind of scientists who were studying like sharks or parasites or living fossils, and we'd always end up talking about climate change or biodiversity loss, and then I'd probably end up talking about how that was affecting mental health, or it just seemed that I was kind of trying to shoehorn this thing into everything, and often the scientists would come back and say, well, you know, we are starting to really understand how important a relationship with nature is for our mental health. And so I was starting to get this kind of impression that you know, there was a lot of people looking at this area. And then so I started to research it and kind of slot it into interviews. And then I wrote a proposal maybe 5-6 years ago, and then my daughter was born about 4 years ago. I had my maternity leave, so I probably wrote it kind of in the last few years.
Well, what I was trying to shoehorn in there was it was pre-COVID, wasn't it? So
oh yes, it was fully signed off a year before COVID happened. So yeah, a couple of years before COVID.
And yet I think COVID is a manifestation of lots of that disconnect, lots of that extracted mentality, lots of that feeling that we are society and humanity is somehow divorced from nature, and it's come back to bite us, hasn't it? Have you ever thought about a sort of an addendum, if you wanted to go back and say, well, in the light of COVID, here's what else I've thought about this, or do you think that the book is that it's sort of vindicated by COVID?
I think that I thought about whether I needed to kind of write a kind of, you know, an extra bit or something about COVID for the paperback coming out, but I mean, in a way, I see, you know, we know that pandemics are caused by you know, the way that we move into habitats and territories, and the way that humans have kind of gone into environments. That's how pathogens spread, and I see that as you know, it's kind of a symptom of our dysfunctional relationship with the earth and our hubris, and a sign that something has to change, you know, and that it's not okay and it's not safe to continue to kind of move into habitats and to kind of extract and colonize and want to dominate the natural world. And I mean, I talk about the kind of end of the book does call for a kind of, a new ethic or a new relationship, like you mentioned earlier. And I think, that was already quite deeply in the book, kind of going back a little bit to the reciprocity stuff I was kind of talking to, that just seems to me like the path that we've traveled for so long of kind of dominion and take clearly isn't working, and this is such a big sign of that. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be the last one as well. I mean, my hope is that in a more local sense, the last year has shone a light on inequality of access to nature across the British Isles, and how unfair it is that people, the way we've designed our towns and our cities, not everyone has access to outdoor space. Some people don't even have a tree outside their window. And if we're going to be living in an age of pandemics, that's something that has to change. And I hope it will give an opportunity to think about regenerative urban dwelling, and how we can address that inequality of access, and just let the rest of nature thrive. Just kind of be more biophilic in our mindsets.
I love the biophilic word because it sort of sounds very similar to bibliophile as well, and for me, biophile and bibliophile, that's who we are. Do you think there's a danger that because the natural world has been all we've had to experience, and it's been the natural world that's right on our doorstep, we've not been able to travel for it, do you think there's a danger that people fall out of love with it because of COVID and sort of lose their nature mojo? I have to confess, that's a concern that I've got.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I've definitely seen people, especially those with kind of young kids, being super fed up of having to go to the park or the playground, and that being it. I don't know. I mean, we saw a lot of activity, didn't we, at those honeypot sites over the last year? People desperately wanting to kind of get to the beach or get to the Snowdon and so on. And I think, I mean, it's a kind of aside, but I think that those moments showed just how little access we all have to the countryside, really, and how the right to roam and so on needs to be extended. But I don't know, I think it's too early to tell whether this kind of renaissance of love for nature, which lots of people seem to have had, I mean, certainly on our street, everyone turned their front gardens into vegetable patches, and everyone was kind of sowing seeds, and it feels like my kind of Instagram squares were full of nature because that's what kind of people were able to see. I think it's too. I don't know. I think it's too
hard to say, isn't it? I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. I do know I'm not going to grow any more tomatoes this year. Oh my words! That was the most expensive way of wasting grow bags I can ever imagine. Anyway, we won't go there into my lack of gardening prowess. It was fun at first, and to be fair, we have just planted. What have we planted? Agapanthus. Now that reminds me of my grandparents. I don't know why, but there must have been an agapanthus thing that my parents had. Anyway, who knows? So it's such a powerful book. It's so impactful. I almost feel that it's a daft question to ask, but have you made changes to your life as a result of writing the book, or you just made changes to your life because of what you knew?
Yeah, I definitely have. It's not daft at all. I think the main change really is that through kind of reading all this evidence, hundreds of studies and textbooks and so on, if before I might have thought, it was a little bit self-indulgent to spend time outdoors, or, you know, if I got into a kind of mindset of, you know, that kind of must be productive, need to do my work, must be making money, going for a walk is a waste of time. Now, because of, you know, this depth of evidence, I tend to be able to override that quite quickly. So, for example, in the last year, when we could, we would always prioritize getting outside, you know, to have some nature connection and to be in the woods, not just because it's nice, but because, you know, I know that, you know, if everyone's feeling a bit stressed, it's going to help. Or if I was feeling like I had a low mood for a while, that's the place I need to go to kind of balance my emotions and restore me to sanity. So I suppose writing the book and the research just made me realize that this is something I need to do. It's like eating vegetables or getting a good night's sleep. It's not an indulgence. I mean, that's probably like a personal quirk from my maybe Protestant capitalist upbringing, but, you know, that I can override that, and I can factor it in every day as something that has to happen. And I suppose the other thing is, you know, the experience of writing the book was kind of this like intrigue and interest in all this science, all this research, but it was also countered by, you know, falling into kind of ecological grief and, you know, climate dread, and realizing what we're doing and how little action our governments and politicians are taking and so on, and feeling quite paralyzed and depressed about the world that I brought children into. And at the end of the book, when I talk a bit more about kind of optimistic, hopeful, positive initiatives and people, you know, forest schools and biophilic cities and wild law, and that definitely, I think, has inspired me to do a bit more kind of local activism and rewilding and regenerating, like a patch of scrubland really behind our house, and some trees have just gone up and bulbs, and as a community we're just trying to kind of rewild it and just make it a home for as many species as possible. So I think kind of reading and talking to people, doing those kind of things definitely inspired me to think, yeah, there are little things that I can do locally which, you know, can counter that eco anxiety and so on.
And have you heard from any readers who've been affected by it? Have you heard from anyone who's made changes from their understanding of what you were telling them?
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been like such a gift and a joy this year to hear from readers who, I guess it was kind of my secret hope that in a way the book is, like I said before, it's a kind of collection of all the most interesting evidence I could find, and I really hope that it would get into the hands of people who, you know, just would find it useful or helpful in what they were doing. And I have had so many messages from people who are you know, trying to work with their council to kind of rewild local areas, or setting up horticultural therapy or forest therapy practices, or, you know, education initiatives, and you know, who have benefited from just this hardcore evidence being in one place, you know, which can be a resource.
Amazing! What not if knowledge is power? Those few pages there are packed with power. It's fabulous. It's definitely a brilliant resource for anyone who's looking to convince others, councils, whoever.
That's what I wanted it to be. I really like it being able to kind of affect some tangible and physical changes is kind of beyond my wildest dreams, and I'm so pleased that it's always nice to hear from people and hear that's what it is, what it's doing. So yeah, or even just to get people outside more. You know, people would say, I'm going outside more, I'm noticing the blossom, or I'm noticing, you know, the fractals and the weeds, and that's very gratifying.
Or the first primrose.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's about time to wrap up, but we talked a little bit about fears, and we've talked about the issues that we're having. But let's talk a little bit about hope. What is the thing that you've got the writing the book? Which bit gave you the greatest hope for our future, that we can reconnect and thrive from that reconnection?
I think it was probably spending time in like the forest school movement and outdoor nurseries, and I've built on this because I've just written another book which will be out in the summer called The Nature Seed, about children and nature. But there are so many people really trying to give all kids opportunities to fall in love with nature. And the evidence suggests that if a kid has an opportunity to love the natural world, then that will continue as adults. And if they don't have that, then it won't. And that has implications for, conservation ethic and protecting, if you don't love trees, why would you want to save them? But also the kind of mental and physical health benefits that I write about. And I think I can see change. You can see changes. There are all these outdoor nurseries sprouting up, and there's forest schools spreading, and it does seem to be a kind of quite grassroots movement, which needs to be better supported by kind of government and so on. But I think, and it's probably because I've got young children myself, but that definitely gives me hope. And then seeing the baby in the soil at the beginning of the book, who's now 4.5, and the joy and the wonder and the connection that she's getting from, spending time in the woods, it just kind of solidifies it all for me. So yeah, I think that's a real hopeful place that I'm witnessing.
And I think there's as we've both spoken about in this conversation, we both had those seeds planted in our early years as well, didn't we? And yeah, we might have drifted away from it, but boy, have we come back to it. And I think we're probably both trying to do much the same thing, which is share that connection with others and inspire them to find their own connection and pass that on. So I guess we're all fighting against the extinction of experience. Well, Lucy, it's been fabulous talking to you. I'm only disappointed that the rest of the community couldn't join us for this, but what a great there's no better reason than bringing a new one into the world. So I hope all that goes smoothly on Saturday or whenever it happens. I did reflect, it's becoming a bit of a habit, because we interviewed Anna McNuff back in October, and she was also days away from going into hospital.
Wow.
So there's obviously something about interviewing heavily pregnant ladies as part of that. So maybe that I should work that into a strapline somehow.
Yeah.
But genuinely, Lucy, thank you so much. It's a fabulous book. I know our subscribers are going to love it. I can't wait to hear from them. I will let you know how it goes with all them. And I wish you all the well. And I'm sure this won't be the last conversation that we have. But that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.